All 7 countries, and Florida too, of course, concluded that kids don't need their development interrupted, the girls don't need their periods stopped and their voices lowered, and the boys don't need to grow breasts. What they need is...
We're about to watch this based doctor completely destroy gender theory with science. Now, we're going to watch this video and you're going to see that the gender-affirming care isn't so caring after all. If you like this hat, check out the link in the description. Let's watch the video.
My name is Miriam Grossman. I am a board-certified child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist, author, and senior fellow at Do No Harm. I have been taking care of patients for 45 years. I'm going to use my time to respond to Dr. McNamara. First, I'm struck by her use of the phrase, sex assigned at birth. Sex is not assigned at birth. Sex is established at conception, and it's recognized at birth, if not earlier. Dr. McNamara claims that her views are science-based, but to claim that sex is assigned at birth is without any scientific basis whatsoever. Its language misleads people, especially children, into thinking that male and female are arbitrary designations and can change. That is simply not true. Dr. McNamara claims that social and medical interventions are the only evidence-based treatment and that scientific evidence shows it is life-saving. Without it, she's warning us, kids will commit suicide. Well, a growing number of countries have effectively banned the care to which she's referring. And thank God there's been no wave of suicides or other mental health catastrophes. 3 years ago, Finland placed strict limitations on medical interventions for minors. Sweden did the same thing after a 14-year-old girl was found to have osteoporosis and spinal fractures from puberty blockers. An investigation concluded, quote, the risks of anti-puberty and hormone treatment for those under 18 currently outweigh the possible benefits. The UK conducted a review and called the evidence very low. They've also placed severe restrictions on the care that Dr. McNamara calls life-saving. Norway also analyzed the data and has made similar changes in policy.
One of the crazy things behind the whole gender theory and trans argument is this idea that withholding the care will lead to suicide. Now, the problem is there isn't the evidence for that, as this doctor rightly pointed out. But also the problem is if somebody has a problem and the symptom of that problem is that they think they are the wrong sex or that they need to change their gender, then surely the solution would be to look at what the cause of that problem is. But instead, you have a whole industry of people who are just happy to give drugs, medication, and affirming care, not realizing that the underlying problems are still there. That many people who, as we grow up, we should have a loving mother and a loving father. And so as we grow up as boys and girls, eventually we get to a point where we start to realize I'm more like my dad than I am my mum, or girls would realize I'm more like my mum than I am my dad. But what happens so often, unfortunately, is that parents are not in a home, or fathers are abusive, or mothers are controlling. And so that association, when you start to see yourself more like this parent or that parent, that it creates some really uncomfortable realities. Like if I am less like my mum and more like my dad and my dad's abusive, what does that mean about who I am and what kind of inner conflict will that create? And often these are the kind of problems that lead to transgender ideas or gender confusion, gender dysphoria, or even homosexuality in many people. And unfortunately, the kind of care that these people need, which is a loving mother, a loving father, to validate them, to validate their feelings or not validate the conclusions they're drawing, right? If you feel abandoned by a father or abandoned by a mother and it causes you to question your sexuality or your sex, those are valid feelings that need to be understood and met with compassion. But it doesn't mean that your conclusion, which is I'm really a boy or I'm really a girl or I'm attracted to boys, doesn't mean your conclusions are true and valid. And this needs to be pointed out. It's not actually affirming care. Let's dive back into the video.
National Academy of Medicine in France warned, quote, great medical caution must be taken in children and adolescents Given the vulnerability of this population and the many undesirable, even serious complications the therapies cause, doctors in New Zealand and Australia have published similar statements. Is Dr. McNamara suggesting that all these countries are rejecting evidence-based treatment and placing their kids at risk of suicide? Regarding that point of view, Finland's gender expert, Dr. Rita Kaltiela, said, quote, "It's purposeful disinformation, the spreading of which is irresponsible." All 7 countries, and Florida too, of course, concluded that kids don't need their development interrupted, the girls don't need their periods stopped and their voices lowered, and the boys don't need to grow breasts. What they need is psychotherapy. I have other objections to Dr. McNamara's testimony. She insists that her position, only hers, represents standard medical care. What she doesn't want you to know is that there is no standard. There's a debate. There's a fierce debate. And on the side opposite her stand such prominent figures as Stephen Levine, Kenneth Zucker, Paul McHugh, and James Cantor, among others. These doctors are giants in the field. They have been treating transgender patients and gathering data and publishing papers about them, and I mean no disrespect here, but since before Dr. McNamara was born. The point is that those veteran clinicians and others who have wisdom and experience are ignored because they disagree with the current narrative. They're against medical interventions for the same reason those 7 countries are. There is no evidence of long-term benefit, but there is evidence of harm. I'll end by quoting Jamie Reed, the courageous whistleblower from the Children's Gender Clinic in St. Louis. I believe that that hospital receives the medical education funding that we're discussing today. She said that doctors at that clinic said, "We are building the plane while we are flying it." We are building the plane while we are flying it. That's how they described the treatment at their gender clinic.
There's a book called Christianity and Liberalism by J. Gresham Machen. I highly recommend you read the book. One of the key things he talks about is because we've made so much progress in industry, in innovation, in technology since the Industrial Revolution, it caused a lot of people to look at old conventional wisdom with disdain. So what happens is we think we've come such a long way. We're so smart. We're so much smarter than the old days, and we're throwing out the old science. And that kind of critical look at everything then starts to play out in other spheres as well. So there's a critical look at religion and Christianity in particular. So a lot of people look at Christianity and say, well, we're so advanced. Why would we trust the writings of men from 19, 20 centuries ago? And that critical examination of everything doesn't just stop. This form of liberalism that he talks about in the book doesn't just stop at the church. It continues to look at everything traditional as bad, even traditional sex, even the concept of maleness and femaleness. And you'll see this at the root of a lot of critical theories: Marxism, feminism, gender theory. And so what happens is people are looking at these activists who parade around as scientists, even though, as we've just heard, their conclusions are not scientifically based, they're ideologically driven. They'll use their influence to rip apart the very fabric that our civilization has been built on. And of course, because we've become accustomed to trusting the experts, and you'll remember during the pandemic, there was all this talk about trust the science, as if the science was an authoritative body of geniuses that sit on a mountain far away and just deliver their revelations to us. People capitalize on that and push their gender theory. And so, yes, I do agree that many of these children, especially those suffering from gender dysphoria and other challenges, need psychotherapy and everything else. But most importantly, they need the biblical fathers and mothers that God had created us to have. You see, I always say this: before God created government, before he created schools, he created the family unit. And in the family unit are so many of the blessings that we need to thrive. Like, just see here, Paul says to the Ephesian church, children, obey your parents in the Lord, honor your mother and father. And then he tells fathers, don't provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So yes, children need to be allowed to be creative and free, but they need instruction. Young boys need to be taught how to be men. Young girls need to be taught how to be women. And what's crazy is that this whole gender theory debate is so contradictory, because what they'll say is, oh, if a boy wants to play with pink dolls, that doesn't make him a girl. If a girl wants to play sports, if she wants to play soccer or football, it doesn't make her a boy. But then they'll say a little boy is demonstrating some more feminine traits. Oh, he must really be a girl. And the girl's demonstrating masculine traits. She must be a... So before you were a tomboy, but now it's like, no, you're actually assigned the wrong body. It's so contradictory. What we need to do as believers in pushing back on this is highlight the hypocrisy, but also showing our children and leading by example, and showing that what it actually means to be a boy isn't about the kind of toys you play with, but it's about growing up to be a man that defends and protects his family, that loves his wife as himself. That being a girl is not about playing with dolls and pink and doing your lashes and stuff, but being a girl is about growing up into a woman that loves and serves and submits to her husband, and that men and women come together, we work together, we don't compete against each other for the flourishing of society. And I empathize with people who have not had that model of a perfect mother, of a perfect father. And the reality is, the gender theory, the whole transgenderism, let's chop off your breasts and cut off your dangly bits and affirm you in the gender that you choose, isn't going to provide the satisfaction you long for, because there'll always be that hole of the father that you didn't have, or the mother that you didn't have. What you need and what is available is to have a father in God himself. The Bible says that God is the father to the fatherless, that he is compassionate and caring, that the Lord loves his people when we come to him. And so that hole that we have in our hearts needs to be met, needs to be filled by the Lord God. And we have a way to access him directly through Jesus, directly through him. And in fact, God, as our creator, will be a much better father than any of us could ever be. But as we submit to him as fathers, let this be an encouragement to fathers like myself, and mothers, if you're watching this, to help our children see what it looks like to be a man and woman of God, so they won't be swept away by these dark and demonic ideologies. If you want to see another video dismantling gender theory, check out this one here. I'll see you there. Peace and blessings.